All right, so when you're writing a paper, you obviously have an introduction paragraph, then you have body paragraphs and the conclusion. And it should all be one big flow. So it's starting with the introduction. I'm going to tell you what I'm about to tell you. The body is, now I'm going to tell you what I told you I was going to tell you. And the conclusion is, now I'm going to tell you what I just told you. So in your introduction paragraph, you're kind of laying out the main idea of what you're wanting to say in the paper, a point you're trying to make, and whatever your argument is, all culminating in the thesis statement, which is usually the last sentence of the introduction paragraph. So that's, out of everything I'm writing, this is the main point. Sometimes you know when you start the paper what it's going to be, sometimes you don't. If you don't, you can kind of skip the intro and come back to it. So each body paragraph is going to be where you're pulling in the sources. Now, a source can be more than one paragraph, but I would say typically each source should get its own paragraph. And you can treat it almost like the same format as your introduction, just for each source. It's here's what this source is saying, here's the argument it's making, here's how it's backing up my main point, which you may not have yet. And so sometimes you have to go through the body paragraphs kind of slow and kind of figure out what they're all saying and tie it into a main point. But I kind of get at least a very rough draft of here's what this source is saying, pull a quote from it. Not only does it fill up the paper a little bit, which is nice, but when you're saying, this author has made this point or said this, you can use their exact words. I try to do that once at least per source. If you have multiple paragraphs, maybe you'll have multiple quotes. You can do it however you want. I found it easiest to have one idea per paragraph. Usually that ends up being one source per paragraph, but it doesn't have to be. So each body paragraph you're saying, okay, here's what this author's saying, here's the quote, here's how that backs up my thesis statement. You get all that kind of written out, then you can go back and fill in your thesis statement if you don't already have it. So you figured out, your 3 to 5 sources, however many you're using. This is kind of what they're all coming back and saying. So your intro is, I'm making this argument. I don't know if it'll help. I can give an example of a paper I wrote. I was making an argument. Developed nations, like the United States, a lot of European countries, they say, hey, protectionist policies aren't good for free trade. And protectionist policies are like levies, where you charge companies from other countries to sell in your country, stuff like that. And for developed countries, that's great. But for a developing nation, think something like Africa, that's not helpful for them. They get stunted by that and they can't grow. So my intro was explaining how developing nations need extra help and don't need to follow the same rule book. Kind of had a one sentence condensed version of that for the thesis. Had a paragraph where I was like, hey, this author talked about how when the United States was young, these are the protectionist policies they used. This is how they, didn't follow other people's rules. And they grew up, and I pulled a quote from it. And I said, okay, that ties back in the main paragraph. I pulled another source where they're talking about Japan when they were trying to develop, and Toyota actually helped them the most. And they didn't follow any kind of international guidelines, levied whatever they wanted. They also stole patents. Not morally correct, but they didn't follow rules, kickstart their economy, and now they're doing well. I'm not going to bore you with all the points. Different ideas that flow in to, hey, we can't apply the same rule book to developed and developing nations. Conclusion paragraph. Once you get all your sources in, now you're saying, here's the main points I told you. Here's how they back up my original argument, my thesis statement, and tie it all up in a nice bow. A paragraph, it depends on how you're writing it. For me, I was doing it on the computer, double spacing. A paragraph was usually 3/4 of a page for me. So if you got 4 sources plus an intro and a conclusion, you could get close to 4.5, 5 pages doing that sometimes. Now, papers don't have to be that long. For what, 8th grade, 7th grade, whatever, probably a 2 to 3 page paper is plenty. So you can do shorter paragraphs. But when you're doing it in that format, it actually gets really easy to stretch it into a longer paper, because every source you pull, it's like, okay, I'm just plugging things into a template, and the template kind of fluffs it out. So anyway, that's all the tips I can think of. I hope that was helpful.